All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for hanging in there through Wednesday morning. I know it's the last morning and people are getting ready to wrap up and head home wherever they're heading to, and appreciate you all coming and joining us this morning. We have a great group here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're referring to as the imaging crisis for clinical trials. And I think everybody here involved in imaging in clinical trials? And pretty much, right? So calling it a crisis is probably something you've known all along, but now we've got data that we're going to discuss that shows why it's a crisis. And we're going to have a discussion. This is literally like 3 slides of introduction, and then we're just going to have our panel sit down and have a conversation and talk about some of the new data, some of which was presented at this conference, and what the root causes are and what some of the approaches that different people on the panel have taken to address how to get the imaging assessments done correctly and timely and compliantly. So I'm going to be moderating the panel. So I have a few different hats that I wear. I'm a professor of radiology at Harvard Medical School, director of the 3D imaging service, and the clinical trials program and the radiology consulting group. And then I'm also more relevant to this session, as my spirit says, I'm the co-director of the Tumor Imaging Metrics Core for the Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Center. I've been at MGH for 27 years. I've been running the Tumor Imaging Metrics Core for 20 years, since we founded it in 2004. And we founded it because the clinical trials folks at our institutions were having trouble getting their imaging assessments done and having them done in time for the office visits and having them done correctly according to the protocols and being able to have something to show at audit on how they got these imaging assessments and what the numbers on their spreadsheets meant. And so they were spending weeks preparing for audits. They were having all kinds of problems getting their imaging assessments done. So we developed a platform to manage all of that because we looked to see how could we solve that problem, and there really wasn't anything available. So we built a platform to manage the workflow, and then other cancer centers, many of whom folks here are colleagues and collaborators, started saying, could we use it too? And we said, well, I guess so. So to try to host a software platform for your own site is one thing, but to do it for other sites is a whole nother level of complexity and support. So we rewrote it from scratch with commercial developers and user experience designers, and then licensed it out to a bunch of other cancer centers. And then about 18 months ago, after we had kind of outgrown our ability to sustain it from inside the institution, we licensed it out, and our team joined the company called UNU. And the reason the company is called UNU is because our CEO, who's Jeff Sorensen, who's over here, used to be the CEO of a company called TerraRecon, which is a 3D software clinical platform that we used in our 3D imaging service. And he talked to people all across the industry about what were the biggest problems in imaging, and everybody kept coming back to clinical trials imaging. And he kept being kind of shocked at how broken the workflows were. And he would talk to people in pharma and sites and CROs, and just kept coming around to the same things. And everybody kept saying, we know the problems. There's been the problems for 30 years. You know, where's the solution? And so he called the company UNU because everybody he talked to knew what the problem was. So he said, you knew. So I'm part-time co-founder and chief science officer with UNU, and I'm still part-time co-director of the Tumor Imaging Metrics Core at Dana-Farber at MGH. And so, you know, I'm here today as one of the panelists, as a site having these issues and having to figure out how to solve them. And we have a number of other panelists who I'm going to have introduce themselves in 1 minute and come sit. So just basically talking about the background of the problem. In oncology, 90% of the clinical trials involve tumors having to be measured. And there's also an access problem and a diversity problem where you have a very high concentration of the clinical trials happening in a small number of sites. And so when you talk about access and diversity, you can't really solve that problem unless you can solve the imaging aspect of it, where patients need to be seen, where 80% of the population goes for their care, they only enroll 3% in clinical trials. So all of those, trials are looking for patients, and they're all fighting over the same small group of patients at a small group of sites. So, having an ability to have a platform that can share across sites and be able to collaborate and get to data at the community level is really important. And then what we're going to be talking about today is some of the error rates in clinical trials imaging assessments at the sites. So we now have done some of these studies presented here from UCSD this week and from UW and Yale in prior AACI conferences, where we've looked at the data as it comes in, as we load it into the platform, and we can see all the imaging time points and assess whether they're done correctly. And we've found at 3 different sites a 25 to 50% error rate when we move into a workflow management platform for imaging. So that's 3, prominent comprehensive cancer centers. And, that I think is something that probably doesn't surprise anyone. And, I like to say 50% error rate, that's pretty impressive. They got it right 50% of the time, because if you understand the complexity of what's before a radiologist to try to do this correctly without a workflow solution, it's really impossible. So I'm going to introduce the panel, or have them actually just come up and introduce themselves. We have a great panel from 5 different institutions, and we're just going to have a conversation talking about what are the challenges in imaging and what's the data that we're going to be talking about today, talking about how large a problem it is, and just kind of being open to questions from you all. We'll start on the other end. So Haley, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Haley McDaniels. I'm the Executive Administrative Director for UC San Diego, and I had used this software in its infancy when I was at MGH as a coordinator in their cancer center, and then happily brought it into our office.
Good morning, I'm Patrick Panlesigi. I'm a Senior Manager for Clinical Operations at Fred Hutch Cancer Center, also the Clinical Research Manager for the GU team. I was also got here as a Clinical Research Coordinator at both Fred Hutch and UCSD.
Hi, I'm Kira Pavlik. I'm the Associate Director for Clinical Trials Operations at the Yale Cancer Center and the Director for Strategy and Innovation for the CTO. I've been with Yale for the last 15 years, doing research in various capacities, and was here when we rolled out the system at our site.
I'm Nick Basinski from Karmanos Cancer Institute at Wayne State University in Detroit. I am the radiology liaison, pretty much just the tumor metrics manager for our whole CTO.
Antoinette Wade, VC of Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center, where I have been able to work in various different disease groups and been with UNU since 2015.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Arcadia Cruz, and I'm actually, the Associate Administrative Director for Quality Assurance and Research Compliance at Moores Cancer Center. Actually, my boss is here. the Executive Administrative Director is on the other corner. But anyways, I just wanted to let you know that my background really, has been pretty extensive, in research, for many years. I'm not going to tell you how many moons back. But actually, I studied, at Baylor College of Medicine, doing a lot of intracranial hemodynamics research with maternal fetal medicine. And then I had to come back home because San Diego is my house. And so I went from working in the academia to the biotech, and from the biotech, I'm like, no, my heart is definitely with the academia. And if I'm going to make that change in my career, it's gonna have to be in oncology. So I came to Moore Cancer Center almost like a decade ago. Can you imagine that? And since then, we have been working very closely, with Haley, making a lot of, improvements, systems improvements as a whole, especially within quality assurance and compliance as a whole. So there you have it in a little nutshell. Thank you.
So I'm going to just start off with a very general question. One thing that I'm sure everybody has been experiencing is increase in volumes of clinical trials, enrollments, and patients. And so, I think nationally there's a 16% increase in the last year. What we're seeing on the sites that we're collaborating with is a 24% increase in their imaging assessment volumes. So I'm assuming none of you have hired 24% more staff on your teams. So what are the challenges that the increasing demand for clinical trials, increasing number of clinical trials, increasing complexity of clinical trial criteria, and not increasing in staffing, like how is that impacting your operations?
As far as our coordinators, it hasn't had a large impact on their workflow. I honestly, and just selling it, but UNU has been a big help with that. I mean, previously we were managing it on Excel spreadsheets for requests, manually going into Epic. Did this read get done? When was it done? Did it get invoiced out? And so this is definitely an improvement for workflow. I would say our radiologists and the radiology team, those are the ones that are really working. We're always short with radiology. And that is the challenge, I think, all across the board for the most part. But I think so far in terms of the actual CTO office staff, it's been pretty stable. It's just managing that list of who's coming in. Some of the drugs may work better, patients are on longer. So you have an influx of patients and additional scans of them on trial.
I think at Fred Hutch Cancer Center, one of the nice things we've been seeing, I think, is a theme across all of the talks that we've seen this past week, is cancer centers have really found ways to get more staff and retain them since the Great Resignation. And Fred Hutch Cancer Center is no different. So we are proud to have more staff that can, at least on administrative and clinical research coordination side, be able to keep up with that. Radiologists, not so much. It's hard to get radiologists. And I think it's more complicated than just having more trials. The protocols and the criteria for imaging is getting different, right? So we have more complex, more nuanced versions of RECIST, nuanced versions of any tumor imaging assessments. And so not only do we not have the radiology teams to be able to keep up with that, the education and the training that enables us to be able to make those assessments is also getting complicated and is hard to keep up with. So,
Of course, yeah.
So do you have a radiologist that reviews the protocol for the required orders that we need to place in Beacon? I think what I'm struggling with, I'm a research nurse at UAMS in Little Rock, and we've had a surge in a new group or diagnosis where it's been difficult for us to pin down exactly what the sponsor wants in order to get it ordered in time for us to get on the schedule, because we are short-staffed in all radiology. And so how do y'all pinpoint exactly what tests they want?
So I can speak to that from the Yale perspective. So we have dedicated radiologists by disease group. So we have some that specialize in neuro, some that specialize in lung, all through the body systems. And they stick with the respective trials throughout their life cycle to maintain some level of consistency. Those specific radiologists will look at the trial when we do that initial submission, that build that goes into the UNU system before the trial opens. And they'll say, okay, for this specific scan, you have to have it done on this CT machine. You have to tell them in the order, to use these margins and, whatever the specifics are for that protocol, or this has to be on the 1.5 versus the 3T. And then we take all of that information, we use Encore as our CTMS system, and we transcribe that into the PC console under the notes section so that when our staff are going in to schedule those assessments, they know exactly, they just copy and paste directly into the order. But that's all done during the feasibility when the trial is submitted for review.
And then I guess a follow-up from that question is a really good question. When you have protocols coming from sponsors, right? They give you a big document that has somewhere in there some imaging assessment criteria. And sometimes it's in the section marked imaging assessment criteria, and sometimes there's modifications hidden in this 100-page document in other sections. So for each of those trials, somebody has to review that protocol and determine what imaging assessment needs are for any patient on that trial, and do that across 50 or 100 or hundreds of trials for your site. So how do each of you handle reviewing those protocols? I know you have different sites are handling it different ways. So maybe a few of the sites can talk about how I think that's part of the question, right? How do you handle getting all these huge documents and figuring out what imaging assessments are needed? Because that's a large part of the problem of why we're getting all of these errors, because a lot of times people don't know what they're supposed to be measuring. So.
Right, I was just going to say sometimes it's hard to parse out like what exactly is needed based off the protocol, and then sometimes there's an accompanying like imaging manual, and so it's difficult for us, and I think also difficult for the radiologist too to figure out what's a woman's.
It's impossible for the radiologist. So let's hear from different of you. How do you do it?
I mentioned is being proactive, it's and over communicating, and I do enjoy that with UNU because we can reach out and ahead of time, right when we identify that trial, and being able to reach out. I love when there's a case report form available that I can see, so that I can see exactly what it is that the sponsors want. So, and being able to share that with UNU so they can see exactly what data we need back from our reports, I feel like that has definitely helped. But the complexity of trials increases the workload. It increases the needs for more meetings to determine more efficient processes, educating staff. But I do like in the beginning, we also have a spokesperson at our site that will be able to submit those initial protocols well ahead of time to give UNU time to process that imaging assessment. Or if there's an amendment that there is an amendment to the response criteria, being able to submit that ahead of time, being proactive so that when that first patient is enrolled, everyone's kind of on the same page and know exactly what it is we need. So I find that to be helpful.
And, go ahead, Nick.
I was saying, it's me. I'm reviewing all the protocols, and I'm just hunting and pecking for those key words. That's the game. So
Great job.
Thanks, Michelle.
Anyone else have any feedback on how you're getting the imaging protocols set up?
Team UNU.
Can you talk a little bit about how that worked?
At our office, we did not have the dedicated resource to really be able to provide that service for us. Trying to do it in the beginning amongst some of us, myself, some other of the associate directors, and any of you in those types of positions, you're in meetings all day. So when are you going to get time to review the protocols? And then, oh my gosh, I am now the bottleneck. So we've opted to engage with UNU for this service. And so that lift, our startup managers are still working with Team UNU, so they understand what's coming down, but they're doing the heavy lifting. So Danielle, shout out. And they're really great. They're communicative. We get questions answered so quickly. Having worked with a lot of different vendors, sometimes after the sale is done, the customer service drops, and it's definitely more of a partnership than just we were sold a product and now we're piecing out. So that's helped us immensely.
I actually had a question for Nick. As Haley, you said that you use UNU. I know at Fred Hutch Cancer Center, pretty much anything that we were trying to make it that way. Everything that we do requires a kind of a village of people to do things, and that's kind of just the reality of what it takes, and a lot of checkpoints and double checks. You do them. Does anyone else do them besides you in tandem? Is there another checkpoint that is able to catch them?
I work with the study coordinators to make sure that everything's covered, but mostly it's me. The study coordinators are kind of the backstop. Gotcha. They get their first assessment back and they say, hey, well, where's this info? Oh, I didn't know it was needed. So that's our system. It's not
how many would you say that you would do? I don't know, in whatever time period. How many new studies are you reviewing?
I review at least 1 or 2 a week.
1 or 2 a week.
Yeah, and make sure when I'm adding the trial to UNU to make sure it's set up correctly. I get all the information in there, but the struggle is making sure that it's clear enough for whomever is downstream, right? And obvious enough is really the key. Clear language is one thing, but making sure that it's called out to the radiologist, to whomever is assessing, that there is a modification, there is a weirdness. That's the struggle. And now I have to. You could call it out in the notes, you call it out in the trial record, and I end up sending special direct emails to every radiologist half the time anyway. So awesome. It's a lot of manual work, but it's something, but it's not a great system.
You said it's not a great system. I mean, like I said, at Fred Hutch, we use a village of people to do things,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I know you do a good job. Your team is here and telling you do a good job, and I'm sure you do. Like, do you think that this is there's enough work there that, and especially if trials pick up, that you'd have to hire just an FTE just to do that?
It's possible that my role would need to expand or to at least get a half person soon. Yeah, if we keep increasing at the rate we're going. Yeah.
Can you speak to what your workflow is? Like, you review the protocol, and then what do you do? Like, how do you communicate directly with the radiologist? Like, what?
Yeah, so once our protocol gets IRB approved, I get a notification and I look through the protocol and look for all the keywords, look for resist, no resist, look for all the modifications that are common, and I set it up in our system, and that way the trial is set for any metrics that need to happen for that trial. There is a template essentially. So any patient that goes in that trial, you can select which criteria you need to use for that study. And then from there, I like I said, just try to make notes on the specific time points, the specific scans within the UNO software when the radiologists go in to do the assessment. At that point, for us, they've already done their clinical read. They go back to it afterwards and do the clinical trials assessment for us. At that point, I'm hopefully have been clear and obvious enough in my notes that they see any modifications or special bits. Does that sort of answer your question? Yeah.
I just have one quick comment in terms of a platform also allows cross-site collaboration, so we can actually see the differences in the protocol setup for the same NCT ID and flag it. And actually, Patrick, at Fred Hutch, we do the protocols. We are your village.
Yeah, and Haley had given a shout out to Danielle, and I just want to mention who Danielle is because Danielle's sitting right here. So Danielle was a coordinator at the Hutch, and so she knew all of the pain of trying to manage getting the imaging assessments done. And then there was a job opening in their equivalent of our tumor imaging metrics core that's called OncoRad there, and she went and was given an introduction to the software and just wanted to come and work with it, and then she asked us if she could come work with us. So she's been working with us for several years, I don't know, 5 years, how many years, I'm not sure. And she and Supriya, who's been working with me for like 12 years, they were our protocol reviewers, but they now are at UNU, and so our tumor imaging metrics core, we're a customer of one of the sites using it. And Danielle and Supriya do our protocol reviews, and because they review so many, they can also do it very efficiently. And so about half the sites...
They trained me how to do it, so
yeah,
I have no training in this.
We'll
before
train
that.
people at the sites, or if people don't have somebody at the site to do it, they will do it for them. So they'll set up all the protocols. Rosie?
You expand a little bit more on the cross-site auditing, and then what happens after that when you discover discrepancies?
Sure. So so it wasn't possible before. So there's a bunch of sort of new things underway. But in the system, aside from, so when we drive the workflow, we actually know who did what when. So that can inform you on like what is the average turnaround time, what is the setup time, lots of operational insights that we can see across sites. So that's one interesting thing. And then on the images themselves, we're actually ingesting every DICOM header and every re-review request and every measurement and annotation. So literally every mark on an image is tied to a protocol, to a calculation, to the data in our system. And now that can be seen live. So what happened that's never been possible before is the protocol, the NCTID is tied to a protocol, it's tied to sites, it's tied to the images, it's tied to the measurements, it's tied to the workflow all the way through. And so we actually had a breakout at this show, which was really interesting, to do a focus group and ask people, well, now that we can do this, what do you want to see? Literally every single discrete piece of data and any humans who touched anything we can display workflow-wise, operationally, or clinically. So if you want to know best response, first response, something for your PI, something for your clinical trials office, it becomes possible. So it's actually much bigger than just looking for discrepancies in terms of the protocol sharing. And then one of the beautiful things is if you build, user-managed tech, then users do things you didn't expect. So we had a crazy one happen in the last few weeks. Maybe I'll have you, Gordon, because you can tell the story best about the resource sharing thing that happened with who's reading for who now that everyone's connected.
I was actually going to segue to that, to your question, Rosie. So,
What
more thing to add though,
Yeah.
because I think what you were asking is what's the cross-check for protocols across the different sites? Is that what your question was?
Right, and then how would you address?
Yeah, so with the sites that are on the UNU system, when I'm looking at a protocol, I actually check to see what other sites have that protocol, especially in cases where I see unusual modifications and where we've done like a negotiation and conversation with the sponsor to find out, to tease out what that modification is really asking for. And then once I see if that protocol is at our sites, I'm usually reaching out and saying, I see how you set it up if they're not a site that uses us for setup, and we just spoke to the sponsor, and this is actually a piece that they're looking for. Another instance is if there's an amendment that comes that changes the criteria, we're reaching out to our sites to say, okay, we know about this amendment, and there's an update in the criteria, and here it is. So that's just something that we're monitoring across the sites that are on the platform.
Yeah, and the business efficiency is spectacular, so we don't charge the price that we would charge to do the same work 15 times. It actually becomes really affordable because we're just looking at how much time does it take us to set up a protocol. But it's literally start to finish, 2 hours, I think, or something like that on average. Some are longer, some are slower, but believe it or not, we're seeing massive economies of scale because we see 4,200 active protocols in our platform. So that's available to people to learn from this data. It's available to collaborate with each other's resources. And honestly, we couldn't do it before either. So this is all a lot of money and a lot of time that when we became a private company, we were able to do to bring this technology forward. So looking for ideas on how we use it. We built it, now use it. So
there, forgive my ignorance, Jeff. If you're building a new protocol in the UNI system, site specific, am I kind of foolish to think it's kind of akin to Beacon with Epic? So is there an opportunity here to standardize it? Like if we have 10 sites that have the same protocol, can you just have like this templated according to the protocol, push it out to everybody?
We already do. In fact, the reason that we sort of kept our powder dry until now is because we knew what sponsors would ask us for. Is I want to set up the trial once and I want to project it across all of my sites, and to do that, I need you to be able to manage the data, which means I need you to be able to de-identify the data, but you got to do it the way I want, and you got to know where the data is coming from.
Yeah.
So we did all that too.
So, if I may, you already knew. So
But we'd love, so top down, we can manage a single trial across all sites, or bottom up, we can help the site manage all of their trials with incredible efficiency.
And back in the day, this is going to date me, guys, I was burning DICOM and anonymized images in Midtown Manhattan for AACI. Do you have the ability through the software, forgive my ignorance because you guys are like core data, but for the like centralizing of the imaging and those classic phase 3s where we have to have blinded readers and all this stuff, do you provide the ability, sorry this turned into a question session for Dan with that, but do you provide the ability for the panel, the lovely panel, of enabling coordinators to push the data, if required, that has to be submitted to whoever the pilot is?
That also, yes, and we created, if you will, to oversimplify, a release of information process for the site, so they can actually provide you either a link or they can provide you a view of the entire tumor grid, but de-identified to the subject. Or we can give your site monitors access directly into the system so that they don't have, and we're also integrating to like Viva CDB, where we put all this beautiful pristine data, skip the EDCs and go straight into the clinical data clouds used by pharma.
Oh, you just read my mind.
You're welcome.
Well, we read your mind, but that's because you know folks have been asking for that at UPMC and other sites. So it's easy to read people's mind when they tell you what they want. Kira, I know you've been chomping at the bit here. Sorry, we've been having a lot of discussion going on here. But
those were the exact questions that I had, so we're channeling there today.
Oh, okay. Did you have anything you want to add to that, or are you good?
No, I'm just excited to see that library come through.
Yes.
That's awesome. I'd love to, if we can find some time, that'd be cool. We have an awful lot to show you.
So I'd like to move to talk about the errors that we've been talking about and identifying. And so Arcadia was the investigator leading the poster at this conference talking about, and I want to also just acknowledge the UCSD folks as well as the Yale and UW Hutch folks for being willing to publish their dirty laundry and acknowledge the problems that they were having previously and be upfront about it. So Arcadia, maybe if you could just share about the findings that you had and how you did that study and what the results were.
Okay. Yes, of course. Thank you so much for allowing us, to share our dirty laundry. As I mentioned before, almost a decade ago, I will come, to these, research committees, in terms of compliance. And one of the things that we would always talk, and it was always stable, was like all the inaccurate, errors that we had, with the tumor measurements. And so, of course, from an administrative level, from a quality assurance level, we're like, we do have a problem. So yes, we did recognize the problem in them, but at the same time, we needed to find out how we were going to solve it. So, of course, we had a lot of issues of, we were trying to eliminate, all of those electronic spreadsheets. We were trying, to avoid the margin errors, from the measurements from one person to another person. We didn't have standardizations, really. And we also knew that we needed to improve the accuracy. Right, so accuracy for us, especially when the protocol is so centered to the tumor, imaging, we needed to meet those endpoints, and honestly, we were off. Plain and simple, right? So when you look at those errors, you are like, my goodness, the impact that these errors have in general, it is really affecting, people's. The impact is on the patient. Yeah. It is right there, because if we are not measuring correctly, we are really not testing, the IP properly. We just simply, a change in a measurement can really change, the treatment plans. And that was one of the things that we were so conscientiously about it. And by introducing, the informatic, imaging system, because this woman was an absolutely warrior, it was like, we need to solve the problem. So we actually, end up, collaborating a great deal, with the radiology department. And once we started looking at the data itself, we realized that more than 50% of all of our findings had some level of issues. And that was unacceptable. 50% is huge. So when we end up, the root cause of some of the errors, to be honest with you, since the dirty laundry is going to stay in this room, it's the fact that at the administrative level, we were having medical oncologists performing the assessments. They didn't have really the level of expertise as the radiologists.
Med-onc fellows.
And to add to it, yes, they were fellows, right? So the level of expertise wasn't there, the consistency wasn't there. And so we are like, we need to automate this. We really need a system that is going to eliminate these, human errors as a whole. And under the leadership, of Haley, our medical director at that time was, Sandeep Patel, we had to fly pretty much solo at the cancer center and went directly, to the oncology department and say, we need to collaborate. We have a backlog. This is unacceptable. The accuracy of the measurements are not there. So by the time when the system was implemented in 2022, then we were able to track, because actually also provide us with a wonderful dashboard that we can make the comparisons and track chronologically, what is happening, at the click of a button. Before we were like, can somebody, pull the information, from cycle 1, visit 2, from God knows, what year ago to make the comparison and see what the results were. So after the implementation, we went from 50% inaccurate measurements, and we decreased it to 2%. For us, was a game changer. And of course, our conscience, were feeling really good, about that. Now, don't take me wrong. There is always, at the operational level, no matter what we do, although the percentage of errors have decreased, we have to implement preventive action plans, where we really need to make sure that the surveillance, of those measurements are in place, that we actually, my goodness, the team has been actually incredibly supportive of every issues that we have. We have a response. So it's almost like, having an entire partnership that has changed really the outcomes for us. And we are meeting with specificity and efficiency and reproducibility, the endpoints for our protocols. So we're looking forward for the day when we are going to be able to integrate all of this data and find a way how we can connect it to the biostats, team, so we can communicate very easily and rapidly, yeah? And I know that you guys were talking about, the multi-sites. That's the huge worry that I have at times, because, the more complex the IIT studies get, the more multi-sites, we bring along. The biggest challenge is, how are we going to get that data in a timely manner? How can we get that data into either our EDC directly or into a, EMR? So hopefully, there are already, a lot of integration conversations that, the systems are having, because it will be just so lovely that with a link, the multi-sites can upload that data into systems like Florence or the EDC in general. So that's the way we went about and solve it.
Awesome. Yeah, I know if we think about the workflows that we currently have, or prior to using certain platforms or things like UNU, if you think about your cancer centers and the workflow, if the radiologist or even let's say that the radiologist or the PI or the physician who did the resist read or the assessment did it correctly, they've written it down somewhere in the chart. Depending on who the PI is or who the reader is, they may have a certain way of writing out that metric onto the note. And then a coordinator is going in and they're maybe making the Excel template for that resist and doing the calculations. There's another variation. Maybe there's one template that everyone seems to be editing. I remember I came from UW, then went to UCSD. So I went from a place that had metric imaging, had UNU, and I went to a place that didn't. I remember making the Excel sheets as a coordinator with the same color as I saw in UNU. So if it was a stable disease, I'd make that cell blue. If it was progressive disease, I'd make that cell red. If it was, there's variances between who is making that template, and so there's that aspect. PI reviews it. If they catch it, anything wrong, great. If they don't, they will sign off on it. Then it goes from that sheet to the EDC manually. This is person to person to person. There's many areas other than just who did the read and variances of copying data that it goes through that can end up being an error as reported data. So my dream, as you're talking about cross-platform, I order the scan in Epic and the resist in Epic. It goes off, we get the read, it goes directly to the OncoRad team at UW to read it, and then the data gets back into Epic, and right from Epic it goes to the EDC, and AI tools there's probably talks about EDC tools that are taking EMR directly into EDC, and from EDC the scans can also go straight from EMR to Bioclinica or Viva or whatever have you for review, goes straight to the committee who investigates for central review of images, and there's none of that person-to-person copying of data. That would be the ideal, but one day.
Yeah, so in addition to a huge source of errors, there's also a huge inefficient use of people's time, right? Yeah. You're talking about all this manual work that people are doing, trying to chase around getting these reads and trying to deal with getting them from one source to another and all this manual interface that, I guess a couple questions. One, can you talk about like where all the wasted time was and where that time is saved when you implemented a workflow solution, and also what were the types of errors you were seeing in terms of the imaging assessments?
One of the biggest issues, the biggest impact that these errors made is, it actually doesn't have to do a lot with the clinical trial data. We think about assessments and it's easy to remember this is clinical trial data. We forget that the impact this has to patients. The protocol tells us if they have progressive disease, they need to change treatment, or we need to get a confirmation scan. The protocol is telling us they need measurable disease to be on trial. If you were getting that wrong 50% of the time, what impact did that have to that patient if they were off by a millimeter, right? So.
Just to add to that, the FDA looks at this with high levels of scrutiny. I don't know if many of you have been in FDA inspections. We had one fairly recently that went very well. But I remember sitting in the room with that inspector for an entire week, and he had me pull up our UNU system. He looked at every single number for every single patient for every single time point. We were there for a very long time. And I remember, he kept saying, okay, where did this number come from? Where was the re-read? How is this documented in Epic? What was the decision thought process here? What was the delay here? Why did this happen? And I think, that was a huge piece of, why we didn't have findings for that respective inspection. But they look at, especially when you're looking at bringing this drug to market, that's not just going to impact the patients that you have at your site, but patients potentially worldwide, the massive impact that could have and whether or not that drug is actually effective in patients.
And, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does anyone have any quality control processes in place for after these reads are done by radiologists, whoever within UNU, anything for anyone reviewing the assessment and making sure that is actually correct and that the radiologist did it correctly? Because that is one thing we probably need, but that is way too much.
You don't want to just rely on all the study coordinators? You don't want to put that all on study coordinators?
No, not at all, no. Because that's where the problem starts, right?
Our investigators are required to sign off on everything before it even goes into the EDC. So for us, we are almost 100% paperless at our site. So for us, our coordinators will take a screenshot of what is in the UNU system and paste it into the coordinator note in Epic. And the investigator is required to review and co-sign on that note, and then specifically note in Epic, I agree with the assessment below, or I'm requesting a reread, and this is why. And then our staff are not allowed to enter that data into the EDC until it's verified by the physician. There are a number of times, and Patrick touched on this too, because of the increasing level of complexity of our trials, I can't even think of many trials that have just one read attached to them. It's RECIST, modified RECIST, this plus that minus this. So we are continuously also working with our radiologists to say you're not supposed to include, lesions that have been radiated before, but for this trial you do. And how many times we have to remind them, that's often a reread request that you probably see in your system, because so many different types of trials now have so many nuanced things that go against what we've been drilled for RECIST 1.1 for years. So just little things like that. And the physicians are really good, I have to say, about catching those things in real time. But then because they have to do the re-read and because we won't have that in real time for the patient that's in the chair right now, the med-oncs are required then to go through and say, I don't think this is truly PD. I think this is, pseudo-progression, and this is why, and I'm treating the patient today because. And then in those cases, you just have to make sure that your documentation is really clean. And we did have, those situations come up with the inspection that we had. And as long as it's documented and you can explain it to the inspector, that stands up in those reviews.
And to the panel, if anyone has a result from the imaging assessment that you don't agree with, can you talk about how that's handled in the platform?
I guess I was going to speak to probably answering a lot of what just talked about. So with the increase and protocols. The complexity of protocols increase. We're also seeing shorter turnaround times, and shorter turnaround time call for the reads to be back much quicker. Again, we send our reads over to our PI for signature, allowing them to review that. If it requires a reread, having to send that back, and then that interferes with patient treatment schedules, delayed care. Which is the inconvenience to the patient, and that's most importantly at the end of the day. That's why we're all here. But we also, you asked about processes, so we do have about 5 compliance specialists that internally monitor our charts. But the goal is to have that finding resolved before it gets to them. But we do have a couple different measures in place that allow the other folks to lay eyes on our data to kind of keep us intact.
Yeah. So if the investigator or study team doesn't agree with something in the radiology report, how do you address that in your current workflow?
Yeah, so we are rereads back to UNU, and being proactive and talking about that well in advance, so that when we send that reread back, and we're getting that quicker turnaround.
And just for folks who aren't on the platform, how do you do a re-review request?
We're going into, we're doing that into UNU, into the platform, going straight in there, very easy, very accessible, being able to click that re-review, being very specific in the comment section about what it is that our physicians have seen and what it is that need to be pointed out.
Assign it to the specific radiologist that needs to do it.
Yeah.
So Antoinette, while you have the mic, we had a question earlier that we didn't get to about multi-site workflows and collaboration. You want to talk a little bit about how we collaborate multi-site in terms of getting the imaging assessments done?
Yes, for VC, if I'm answering this correctly, hopefully I am. I have my colleagues out if I'm not. So our local radiologists, yes, they do our reads for standard of care purposes. But when it comes to our clinical research reads, we are outsourcing all of those out to UNU. So they're doing all of our reads for our clinical research participants.
And in terms of who is doing those imaging assessments?
Yeah, MGH, I'm sorry, MGH is doing those.
So just talking about how sites can work together. So VCU wanted to have us do their reads for them. So we've been for 9 years doing all of the imaging assessments for VCU. When they started doing it, they were doing about 20 time points a month, and now they're doing 50 to 80 time points a month. Like the program has grown, or more? Sorry.
I think it's closer to 100.
Okay. So,
I was going to say as much as
it's
80
really
plus.
grown, and it's taken all of the stress away from their having to get their own radiologists who are too busy with their clinical work and didn't have the dedicated radiologist to do the imaging assessments, so that we did them. Now, UW, maybe Patrick, talk a little bit about how we also work together in terms of our supporting each other across sites.
Yeah, so at UW, the UW OncoRad team is the source, and I've never not known working at UW without UNU. So I don't know what it was beforehand, but the UW OncoRad team at Fred Hutch Cancer Center does have radiologists, and also we work with UNU and their team as well, as one of the early adopters of this platform. And so that's been really nice, and I think Kira at Yale, you also being early adopters of this platform have enabled us to basically tap into resources everywhere now, right? Not just having to rely on just simply the OncoRad team, and we now have an expansive use of resources. I want to go back to the review process. If you have a reread, it's probably the easiest thing. We usually just email. You can hit the button on UNU, or we can hit an email to our OncoRad team just explaining and detailing why the PI thinks that this should be reread, explanation, and it goes directly to that radiologist who read it, and it's a very collaborative process. I think that's important to highlight, and that's what these technologies allowing sites to do, is to be collaborative, not just between peer-to-peer, but also site-to-site. So.
And in that re-review request, I see we have a couple of questions. Just let me respond to that, and then I'll come to the questions. In that re-review request process, when the case is finalized in the system, it's locked. And when you re-review, it has to be unlocked with a comment and a reason, and then a comment for what was changed if it's changed. So when you have an audit, you can see everything is tracked in audit trails, any changes and everything. Also, just finishing on the comment about collaborating. So at UW, sometimes they're short on their radiologists. If they're, they have a smaller team of radiologists, and when they're off, our radiologists will do the read. So there's an option for a one-step read or a two-step read, and some of the sites here do one-step, some of them do two-step, some of them do no-step because they just outsource them. So in the two-step process, which we do, we have image analysts who are either CT techs or research fellows do the preliminary assessment, and then we have a pool of radiologists who meet with them once in the morning, once in the afternoon, every day to do the reviews and finalize them and make any edits. So when their radiologists are off and they need support on radiologists, our radiologists will read their image analysts' prepared cases. And right now, our lab at MGH, we are short this month. I have 2 of our image analysts on medical leave, 1 on maternity leave, and 1 is just left to start a clinical fellowship, and we just hired somebody who's starting training. So we are really short on image analysts, but we have plenty of radiologists. So UW image analysts are doing a bunch of our cases this month, and our radiologists are reading those. So, you can just see how VCU is having us help them, UW is helping us, and we're helping UW. So we're all kind of able to work together and share the work across sites. And we're also able to harmonize multi-site trials. So we can be a site for multi-site trials and do all the imaging assessments and have them just upload cases to us. For multi-site trials. I know we had a few questions. Josh, who had questions up? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure who had their hands up first. I'll go from the front to the back. So yeah.
So are you building in your budgets the costs for the software and the reads? And are sponsors pushing back? Are they willing to pay?
No, they're willing to pay. We even put stat fees in there. Not just stat fees for the radiology standard of care, but stat reads for our OncoRad team. So if we want to get resists or we want to get the imaging assessments stat as well, we have an extra fee that they need us to pay.
We do tiered budgets for that too. So depending on the complexity of the read, if it's just RECIST 1.1, that's tier 1, that's the lowest. But the more complicated and the more variable reads, especially if you have multiple types of criteria that you have to meet, we go up to tier 3, and that's a upcharge in addition to anything that would be urgent. Jen and Tech's in the back too if you want. Sponsor director.
We, just FYI, we actually track on a trial by trial basis what you want to bill the sponsor and what you want to pay the readers, and if it's a stat read. So because we're driving the workflow, we also give you a list of exactly who to bill and who to pay based on the circumstance.
Yeah, so you can just hit an export for a monthly report, gives you all the information.
Yeah, and if you're wondering how all this collaboration works, which again wasn't possible until recently, so it's interesting that MGH is providing reads to sites and then utilizing technologists to deliver the reads for sites. So it isn't actually true that the world is as short of radiologists as people might think. It's that there's a sort of capitated supply inside the academic centers, and there hasn't been a web-based way to drive collaboration and to invite others into the workflows. Just wanted to clarify that we don't provide reads, we don't compete with CROs or imaging CROs. We're creating a platform that you can select anybody you want to have read, and they can connect securely, and you can invite them into your workflows. And that means that probably how academia even constructs an imaging core will look a lot different than it did before. So there's a lot of collaboration potential. And if you're wondering how that contracting works, I'm sure you are, then we actually make the readers subcontractors and have a subcontractor BAA. So you have one relationship with UNU, and you'll have a whole list of people you can collaborate with across your trials. And for those of you that have UNU, you already do. And then we don't do a markup on the reads, we're just facilitating transactions. So it's a collaboration and workflow platform, but we don't provide the reads, we just connect you to people who do.
So a lot of, especially phase 3 and registration trial, have an independent reviewers of the RECIST criteria. So is this system going to eliminate that?
So it opens a lot of interesting possibilities. So one misconception when you're talking about central review, like when we talk to pharma companies, they say, yeah, we know there's problems with site reads, but that's why we do central review. But if you're having errors at the sites, and that's what you're using to determine who goes on the trial, and then you send it for central review later, you know, there have been studies that show about a 10% censor rate on patients who get enrolled and treated on trials, and then they go for central review and they find that they were not meeting the criteria to be enrolled on the trials. There was a study that came out this year that showed that the costs of that, the costs of enrolling and treating a patient are so high, not to mention the ethical and medical legal issues of putting a patient on investigational treatment that they don't qualify for. Those costs are an order of magnitude higher than the entire imaging cost for the trial. So saying, oh, well, central review is going to fix the site problems,
That's not what I was saying.
I'm just saying, like, that's one whole discussion. To your comment, if you, so the other challenge is, you're talking about phase 3 trials and things, but all like the phase 1 trials and rare disease trials and things rarely use central read. So they're depending on the site reads, even without central, you know, not even having central read. But every trial with or without central read needs a site read. So if you can do the site reads correctly, I went to a meeting at the FDA about 10 years ago where they were saying, can't we just use the site reads? And everybody said, yeah, we should, but nobody trusts them, so we need central review. And I was sitting there going, we can do site reads compliantly and accurately, you know? So, you know, I think there's a real potential for having the site read be a first read and having maybe a secondary blind read and then an adjudication if they disagree, as opposed to needing, you know, 2 central blinded reads and adjudication, or have, you know, just a site read and a blinded read on the same platform. So, I mean, it really opens up very interesting possibilities.
I did have just one question about the collaboration. Like, how do you guys deal with PHI with that?
So we have BAAs, and then we have subcontractor BAAs. So it's all HIPAA. Everything on our platform is HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant, 21 CFR Part 11 compliant, SOC 2 security. We've been through audits with sites, with core labs, with sponsors. We've never had a finding.
So along the same lines of, you know, utilizing the pool of radiologists, if we were using our local radiologists to do the reads, but then had some occasional situations that emerged where we needed some additional third-party support, like, you know, there's been plenty of instances where a radiologist and the treating medical oncologist will disagree, and then we need a third person to step in and kind of make that tiebreaker, but as you can imagine, that can get a bit awkward at times. So having somebody that we could tap into to kind of be that tiebreaker from a, you know, unbiased perspective would be really helpful. Is that something that would be possible with you?
You could absolutely do that.
Yeah. We're actually, in a few months, we're going to have full adjudication features. So if you want to run a trial, you can specify what the parameters are to drive to adjudication, and we'll actually drive the work list to the readers that are inside or outside your facility. And then keep track of all of the data points, including the finalized one.
John? Oh, me? Yes. I forget my question.
Oh.
That's Dan.
Oh, that's Dan. Sorry. You were sitting next to Tess. And
No worries. I'm not as cool as John, but
okay.
I've never read that.
Okay, great. So, you know, and just touching on what we were talking about in terms of the errors, the types of errors and the impact that they have. So a large portion of the errors were on follow-up having the wrong response assessed. So they might call it a partial response when it's progressive disease or vice versa, and that's then a protocol violation. And then, you know, you've got findings and you've got all kinds of issues. But then there's also things with using the wrong criteria, saying applying resist when it's a IR resist trial or you know, something like that, and missing data in the templates, and having patients enrolled at baseline that don't meet the inclusion criteria. So those are the kinds of problems that really have a huge impact on the patients in the trials. So let's see, what other questions? So just broadly, you know, the problems that you have in clinical trials, you know, imaging adds a level of complexity, but how how does this relate to other areas? Like, are there other areas or that have the same level of challenges as imaging, or is imaging kind of like the biggest area of challenge that you find in the clinical trials workflows?
I can actually, just add, for us, in comparison, with the imaging errors, we do have the adverse events. Adverse events, I think, is is another area that is not very consistent. The way the things are graded, the workflows that are in place. And again, I come from this quality assurance and compliance perspective, where, for example, there are times, where at a very specific center, the workflow asks for the clinical research coordinators really, to even grade, proactively, grade the adverse event, and then, have the physician, to sign off on it. But from my perspective, there is a great chance of error. Our PIs, are very busy. You have, an entire adverse event log that it's like so many adverse events. And sometimes you just have to trust who did it. But if the level of expertise from the clinical research coordinators is not quite there, that's a task that it should not be done by anyone else but the physician. Is this something, really, that creates issues of timelines in they are incredibly busy in clinic? Are they really making the assessments, in a timely manner? So that is one of the things, in clinical trials that I think that there is a huge chance of error, and there need to be, set up, some type of preventing plaque infections. Would you agree on that, all of you? So that is one that I can identify. And after everybody answers the question, I wanted to add something to this nice lady right in front of me that asked a question before.
Go ahead.
Well, I got to hear all of you, saying, okay, how do we eliminate, who's policing, the results, right? One suggestion that I have is, try to see if your department can implement a system of, inter-observer data versus, intra-observer data. It may take quite some time, but it will be very revealing. I used to, do a lot of, carotid scans and intracranial blood flows, and I realized that I had a margin of error myself. So we had to go through an entire study within the cardiology department in neuroscience just to make sure, how accurate am I? And, just passing it on to you, you go ahead and perform the very same scan and the same measurements and see what was our deviation. So that is just a suggestion that I have in general.
So we have 5 minutes left, and so two final things. One is I'd like to thank our panel, because you guys have been fantastic. And I'd like to thank our audience for all the really great questions and discussion. And I'd like to just give each panelist a chance to sort of make a closing thought and any advice to the audience, anything you'd like to share that you feel like you've wanted to say but haven't. Maybe starting with Haley and working down the row.
I think we really look at this from the patient perspective, and this was an ask from our radiologists when we were asking for timely reads. Like, we need a better system. Obviously, an Excel spreadsheet sending out to everyone, it doesn't work. And so we've seen, we still have some backlogs at times, and so we need to, rely on potentially the network here, but they've been happier, the coordinators are happier, the docs are happier. I'm happier. I can see when things are past due. I know what's coming up. Every morning I can see what things are due today, what radiologist is pending reads, and then also with our finance team to be able to actually pull that, make sure that the radiologists are paid appropriately for the month, and we can see which ones were standard, which ones were stat, who did how many, and then we can invoice the sponsors. So it's made things a lot easier for multiple areas within our department. And then I sleep better at night. When we pulled all the legacy data, we knew that there were going to be issues, and we could have left it. We decided to pull it and just kind of rip the Band-Aid off. And as Arcadia mentioned, we're no longer in that state anymore. So we definitely are feeling a lot more confident about what we're doing. And I mean, that's the power of some good technology and collaborators on the other side.
I want to go back, Gordon, to your question about talking more broadly about issues as a closing. But I mean, I think something that's pretty frustrating is GCP is not efficient. GCP is redundant. It is requiring us to be redundant and to have all these checkpoints, but it's not requiring us to be very efficient. And I think the lack of efficiency in operations standpoint adds variances for error and potentials for error, just like we see with reads, just like we see with AEs. And so I think we need to find ways to use technology to be more efficient. Obviously, having better training and then having that as better ways to be more efficient. But yeah, I think relying on things like technology is what's going to make us more efficient in what we do so that we can eliminate a lot of the inconsistencies.
Just to echo what everyone has pretty much already said, I also want to just highlight that even though there is such utilization of this tool and it's obviously made a huge difference for us, it's also still not perfect. So having that QC system in place, and it could never replace fully the need for ongoing education for everyone on your team. At the coordinator level, certainly the investigator level, and especially for your radiologists, it is a tool, and it's a hugely valuable one, but the need for ongoing training and education is still paramount.
Similarly, my extension of that is that it's training, continual education, and collaboration. Tools are tools. You still have to communicate and work with people on a human-to-human basis to make sure that you're getting the results and the data that you need.
Yep, and I think I'll probably piggyback off all of that, being proactive, including everyone. The moment the protocol's identified, working with your activation team, collaborating with all parts of it, utilizing resources. We always talk about resources. If it's something, and I know I go back to this case report forms, and I know that's not always available in the beginning, but if it is, being able to review it so you can see exactly what it is that I need to report and what kind of data needs to be collected so that we are avoiding the discrepancies. Revisiting the processes that you do have to see what do we need to tweak, what do we need to further implement. Reaching out to our teams, we do some internal training, but we've also had Danielle to come and do some training with us as well. So utilizing your resources, being proactive.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fun. Okay, so I really would like, to close just by, overemphasizing that implementing this type of, informatic systems to perform all of these measurements has not only, impacted the lives of patients and their treatments, of course, as the most ultimate thing of what we do in clinical trials. But I also, have to tell you that it has been very cost efficient. For example, our internal monitors, they don't have to spend time scrambling, trying to find out where that data is, to make a comparison. And, to echo you, when the FDA comes, it's just amazing. Here is the data, here is the comparison, and here is the chronological, course of the entire measurements, and that makes a huge difference. So thank you, actually, those people behind all of this technology, because it's serving the cancer centers to the T. Yep. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'd just like to close with some acknowledgments of my own to appreciate all the people in the panel, but also all of the teams that you represent that I've been very fortunate and appreciative of being able to collaborate with for all these years. And I feel very lucky and privileged to have such a great opportunity to work with so many great people. And also acknowledge our team back home at MGH and the Tumor Imaging Metrics Corps, and our team at UNU, who have just been wonderful partners for me to help grow this beyond the walls of our institution and into something that is really evolving into just an amazing opportunity in so many ways to work with so many great people. So, to Danielle and Jeff and Lindsay, and the rest of our team who are not in the room here, for UNU, for TIMC, and for all our collaborating sites. I'm very thankful and appreciative. So, and thank you all for coming to our session.